Okay, welcome back. We left off the last video talking about the idea of reading and its importance, and I just wanted to make the final point that effective reading leads to effective thinking. But I'd also like to consider videos as reading. There are ways to get information, there are ways to start processing complex ideas. The one thing about reading, though, is that you can do it at your own pace. Sometimes you have to try to do it a little faster than you want to. I understand that. But try to do the best you can and try to understand things the best you can. These are some pretty complex topics, and sometimes they take more than a few weeks to really kind of understand them. So do the best you can. I think everybody's doing a good job. Some people also sometimes mentioned that they think the class is one-sided. And a lot of times that goes a little unexplained. So I think that when people say that, they mean politically, because a lot of people associate this idea of refugees or this idea of social inequity with a liberal agenda. Some people think that, and what I'd like to say is that yes, there are some things that have been titled part of the liberal agenda that fit in with the things that we're talking about in this class. But I like to look at it less through a partisan political lens and more through a humanitarian lens. If we're looking at the idea of people being mistreated, I think Republicans and Democrats alike could look at a group of people and say, hey, yeah, they're suffering. We should probably do something about that. It just comes to there's some disagreements about who is suffering and how they're suffering and how much they're suffering, and that's the thing that we need to dig into. But I think it's pretty obvious that there are people suffering in the world, particularly people who decide to flee their countries and are displaced because of war or violence or political opinion or whatever, where they fear for their lives and leave. I think we can all agree that nobody should have to do that. So then what is our response as the world? Do we just close off and say it's not our responsibility? Or do we say, hey, we're part of this global community. We have goods and services and relationships all over the world. Is there something that we should be doing about this? So another thing that I wanted to comment on is that there's a certain amount of white male defensiveness when we start talking about a lot of these things of diversity that are coming up. And what I'd like you to consider, especially if you're a white male, is that these are not attacks on you as a white male. You can't help being born as a white male. I'm a white male, right? White male American, able-bodied, middle class, English speaking. If you go down the list of privileges, I've got every single one of them, right, in an advantaged way. But I also recognize that, and I recognize that there are things that I haven't had to deal with in my life as a result of my social location. And I don't necessarily think that it's fair that other people had to deal with a lot more stuff. So I'm working on that, but I also try not to get defensive when people complain about white male patriarchy, for example. I look at, okay, well, somebody's seeing something that maybe I'm not seeing, so maybe I should look at this and pay attention to it for a little while and see if their argument is valid. If you're really interested in particular in digging into race and racism, particularly from a perspective of being a white person, there's a book called What Does It Mean to Be White by Robin DiAngelo. And it was an extremely insightful book for me in terms of understanding my racial heritage as a white person, because it's not questioned much in our particular American society. A lot of white people have trouble answering the question, how has race played a role in your life, because they haven't had to think about it much. But if you ask a person of color, particularly in the United States, what has been the role of race in your life, they usually have a very detailed story to tell about how it has played a role. So that's another example of privilege, that if you haven't had to tell the story of your race in your life, or you don't see how it affects your daily life, then that is a privilege. So one quick thing too, People were asking questions about why did I have people record the Module 7 discussion post as an audio recording as opposed to just writing it. One is a practice with the University Learning Outcome 2, oral communication. Another one is practice for later when you do the quote podcast of your civic engagement project where you record your essay. A lot of people find that when they read their own work out loud, they're able to catch some things that they wouldn't catch if they're reading it in their head, and then they end up making some pretty substantial and interesting and positive revisions to their writing. So it's a writing technique too, to read your stuff out loud and see what it sounds like. Another thing is that it personalizes the class a little bit. I get to hear your voice. It's possible that you're seeing me right now and you're thinking, oh, that's not at all how I had Greg's Greg's voice in my mind. And this creates videos and audio recordings create a little bit more personal connection between me and you. So that's another reason why I do it, even if it can be a little annoying technologically sometimes. For example, I've hit 6 minutes on this video already, and I know that it's not going to transfer as well if I go above about 6.5 minutes, so I'm going to stop now and do one more.